A retired Navy SEAL returns to a weathered lake house in Maine after his adoptive mother's funeral, planning to stay one night and vanish again. The German Shepherd at his side steps inside, then drops in front of an old floor hatch near the kitchen, like a sentry refusing to move. That night, at the exact minute she died, the dog releases a single low howl, quiet enough to be mistaken for the house settling. By morning, a local reporter arrives with the woman's last message: "Don't let silence win." Before they can make sense of it, a stranger shows up, calm, cold, and certain that whatever lies here must stay buried forever. The dog disagrees, pulling them toward the lake in the rain, as if returning to a mission that never truly ended. If you want to know what's hidden beneath the floor and beneath the water, and whether he chooses truth or mercy, like and subscribe to hear the ending. Daniel Cole arrived at the house just before dusk, when the sky above northern Maine seemed undecided about letting go of the day. The lake lay stretched out behind the trees like a sheet of dull metal, unmoving, reflecting neither sky nor forest with any enthusiasm. It was late spring, but the air still carried a sharpness that crept into the lungs, a reminder that winter here never truly apologized for its absence. The house stood exactly where it always had, set back from the water, half hidden by tall pines and birch trees, its wooden siding darkened by decades of weather and patience. A simple two-story structure. No charm that would catch a stranger's eye. No attempt at beauty. It was a house that existed because it had always existed. Daniel parked his truck at the edge of the gravel drive and cut the engine. For a moment, he stayed inside, hands resting on the steering wheel, shoulders squared as if he were still waiting for an order that would never come. He was 40 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with a frame that spoke of years spent carrying weight that mattered. His posture remained upright even now, even alone, a habit burned into muscle and bone. The olive-green combat uniform he wore looked worn but carefully maintained, the fabric molded to his body like a second skin rather than a costume. This was not nostalgia. It was familiarity. In the passenger seat, Hank shifted. The German Shepherd was already alert, head lifted, ears erect, and angled forward. At 6 or 7 years old, Hank carried the solid confidence of a dog who had learned the rules of survival early and had never forgotten them. His black and tan coat was clean, but dull from travel, thick along his back, lighter at his chest and legs. His amber-brown eyes tracked the tree line without urgency, but with intent, as if listening for something beneath the quiet. He did not whine. He did not bark. He simply watched. Daniel opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. The sound echoed too loudly in the stillness. Hank followed, landing lightly on the ground, tail low and relaxed, but his body remained angled toward the house rather than the lake. Daniel noticed this without commenting on it. He had learned long ago that Hank did nothing without a reason, even when the reason did not announce itself. "This is it," Daniel said, more to himself than to the dog. Hank did not respond. He never did, but his ears twitched. The funeral that morning had been small. Margaret Hale had wanted it that way. She had been a quiet woman in life, tall and narrow-shouldered, with prematurely white hair, always pulled back into a neat knot, as if loose strands offended her sense of order. Her hands had been strong but gentle, the hands of someone who had spent years doing practical things without asking for credit. She had never spoken much about her past, and she had asked even less about Daniel's. When he had shown up on her doorstep decades earlier, silent, angry, carrying more grief than words, she had taken him in without asking where he came from or why he needed to disappear. She had raised him the way some people tend land after a fire, carefully, patiently, without expectation that anything would bloom quickly. Daniel unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The hinges groaned in protest, a sound that seemed louder than it should have been, as if the house itself objected to being disturbed. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and something else. Dry, sharp, almost metallic, that Daniel could not immediately place. He stepped inside. Hank hesitated on the threshold. "That's new," Daniel muttered. The dog leaned forward, nose working, then pulled back slightly, muscles tightening along his shoulders. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply refused to cross the line. Daniel frowned. Hank had entered worse places without hesitation. Collapsed structures, flooded buildings, rooms thick with smoke and panic. A quiet house should not have stopped him. "Easy," Daniel said. "It's just a house." Hank's gaze flicked briefly toward him, then back inside. The message was clear enough. Not just a house. Daniel stepped fully inside, dropped his duffel near the door, and waited. After several seconds, Hank followed, though his movements were careful, deliberate, as if memorizing the floor beneath his paws. He moved through the entryway slowly, pausing once to sniff near the base of the stairs, then again near the narrow hallway that led toward the kitchen. The living room looked unchanged. The same worn couch, the same lamp with the crooked shade, the same framed photographs lining the wall. Margaret at different ages, never smiling broadly, always standing straight. Daniel in a few of them too, awkward and thin as a teenager, eyes already too old for his face. Daniel exhaled and rolled his shoulders, a habit that surfaced whenever he entered unfamiliar territory. He had planned to stay one night to sort through papers, contact the lawyer, and leave. That had been the agreement he'd made with himself during the long drive north. He did not intend to sleep here. Hank walked toward the hallway and stopped abruptly. His body stiffened, paws planted, head angled toward a closed door near the kitchen. An old wooden panel set into the floor, barely noticeable if you didn't know to look for it. Hank lay down directly in front of it. "Hey," Daniel said quietly. "What are you doing?" The dog did not move. His body blocked the door completely, chest pressed to the floor, chin low, eyes fixed on the wood as if it might move. Daniel crouched beside him, studying the panel. He remembered it now. A storage hatch. Margaret used to keep preserves down there. Nothing more. "You're blocking a pantry," Daniel said, attempting humor that didn't quite land. "That's not exactly tactical." Hank's ears flattened briefly, then lifted again. He stayed where he was. Daniel stood and moved on, telling himself not to read too much into it. He checked the kitchen, the small study, the downstairs bathroom. Hank followed, but only to a point. Twice, he refused to enter certain rooms, stopping at the doorway as if an invisible line had been drawn across the threshold. Daniel told himself it was stress, travel, new smells layered over old ones. But unease crept in anyway. Night settled slowly, thickening the shadows outside the windows. Daniel lit a single lamp and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope the lawyer had left for him. He had not opened it yet. He wasn't ready to make Margaret's death official in ink. Hank lay near the floor hatch again, eyes half closed, breathing slow. At exactly 11:42 p.m., Hank lifted his head. Daniel glanced up, heart tightening for reasons he couldn't name. The dog let out a low, almost inaudible sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A soft, breathy whine that barely disturbed the air. It lasted only a second. Daniel checked his watch. Margaret had died at 11:42 p.m. A cold awareness slid into him, unwelcome and sharp. "Stop it," Daniel said under his breath, unsure whether he was speaking to the dog or to himself. Hank lay back down. The house creaked gently, settling into the night. No voices, no movement, nothing supernatural, nothing that could be named. And yet, Daniel leaned back in his chair, suddenly alert in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with memory. He had learned to distrust feelings. Feelings got people killed. Instinct was different. Instinct had rules. Hank did not operate on superstition. He rose, crossed the kitchen, and stood over the floor hatch. The wood looked ordinary, old, scuffed, but something about the way Hank watched it made Daniel hesitate. "Tomorrow," he said finally. He turned off the lamp and headed toward the stairs, boots heavy on the wood. Hank did not follow. He remained where he was, guarding the hatch like a sentry who had not been relieved. Daniel paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back. The house was not haunted. He was certain of that, but something in it had been left unfinished. And houses, like people, remembered what was not put to rest. Morning came without ceremony. A pale light slid across the lake, thin and colorless, as if the day itself was unsure whether it wanted to begin. Daniel woke on the couch with his boots still on, the stiffness in his neck familiar and oddly comforting. He had slept the way he always did, in fragments, alert even in rest. The house was quiet, but not empty. It held sound the way old wood holds cold. Hank was not beside him. Daniel sat up slowly, scanning the room. The dog stood near the front window, body angled outward, ears high and forward, tail still. He looked less like a pet and more like a sentry posted at a boundary no one else could see. "You hear something?" Daniel asked. Hank did not turn. His focus sharpened instead. A moment later, the crunch of tires on gravel cut through the stillness. Daniel stood and moved to the window. A gray sedan had pulled into the drive, dust rising briefly before settling back onto the stones. The engine shut off, and a woman stepped out. She moved with hesitation. Not fear exactly, but the careful deliberation of someone who did not want to be seen too soon. She was tall and slender, with narrow shoulders and a posture that leaned forward slightly, as if she were always listening more than she spoke. Her dark hair, nearly black, was pulled into a low ponytail, practical rather than styled. She wore a simple jacket, jeans faded at the knees, and boots that suggested long walks rather than fashion. Her face held a seriousness that went beyond age, the kind shaped by watching things unfold rather than participating in them. There were faint lines around her eyes, not from smiling, but from concentration. Hank let out a low sound, not a growl, but something close enough to tighten Daniel's chest. "Easy," Daniel said quietly, though he wasn't sure who the command was for. The knock came a moment later, firm, controlled. Daniel opened the door. "Daniel Cole," the woman said, voice calm but steady. "I'm Eleanor Pike." She extended her hand. Daniel noticed the grip when they shook, light but not uncertain. "I didn't expect company," he said. "I didn't expect to come," she replied. "But Margaret asked me to." That name landed differently now. He stepped aside to let her in. Eleanor paused at the threshold. Her eyes moved through the room quickly, taking in the furniture, the photographs, the scuffed floor. When her gaze dropped to Hank, she stopped. The dog stood directly between her and Daniel, chest square, eyes fixed on her face. "I won't come closer," Eleanor said gently. "If that's all right." Daniel studied Hank. The dog's posture was rigid but not aggressive. His ears flicked once, then settled. "She can come in," Daniel said. Hank did not move at first. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, allowing Eleanor to pass. The tension in his shoulders eased, though he stayed close enough that his presence could not be ignored. Eleanor exhaled softly, a sound she did not seem aware of making. "I don't usually get welcomed by dogs," she said. "Or people." Daniel gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Yes," she said. "Please?" They sat at the table where Daniel had stared at Margaret's unopened envelope the night before. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the mug when he placed it in front of her, though she didn't drink. "I'm a reporter," she said. "Local paper. Mostly zoning meetings and human interest pieces. I don't chase scandals." Then why are you here? Daniel asked. Eleanor hesitated, eyes lowering to the steam rising from her cup. Margaret called me 3 weeks ago, she said, out of the blue. We'd spoken before, years back, about a small land dispute near the lake. She was precise, careful. That night, she wasn't. She looked up then, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. She said, "If something happens to me, don't let the silence win." That was all. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Daniel felt something shift inside him, an old pressure, familiar and unwelcome. She didn't think she was dying, he said. No, Eleanor replied. She thought she was being ignored. Hank lay down near the kitchen doorway, eyes still on Eleanor, but relaxed now, as if a decision had been made. There's interest in this property, Eleanor continued. Not the house, the land. Someone's been quietly offering well above market value, enough to make people ask fewer questions. Who? Daniel asked. Eleanor shook her head. Shell companies, lawyers, nothing that leaves fingerprints. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He had learned to recognize that structure, the way responsibility disappeared behind layers of formality. At that moment, Hank rose again and walked toward the hallway. He stopped, turned, and looked back at Eleanor. Then he sat. Daniel followed the dog's gaze. What? He asked. Eleanor blinked. What is it? Hank moved closer to her, slow and deliberate. He lifted his head slightly, sniffed the air near her jacket, then stepped back and lay down again, resting his chin on his paws. Daniel frowned. He doesn't do that. Eleanor's voice softened. Margaret had the same jacket, similar fabric. She said it held smells better. The room went still. Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle. Not fear, not shock, but something heavier. Recognition. That was when the house creaked, not the casual settling of wood. This was deeper, intentional, a sound that seemed to come from beneath their feet. Hank stood instantly, ears sharp, body aligned toward the kitchen floor. Eleanor's breath caught. That didn't sound... I know, Daniel said. They moved together toward the floor hatch. The wood was still, unassuming, ordinary. Hank sat in front of it again, as he had the night before. Eleanor looked at Daniel. You didn't tell me about this. I didn't know how, he replied. The rehook settled between them, not as a revelation, but as a question neither was ready to ask aloud. After a long moment, Daniel stepped back. Not today, he said. Eleanor nodded, relief and disappointment crossing her face in equal measure. I didn't come here to dig, she said. I came to listen. Daniel believed her. By the time Eleanor left, the lake had taken on a faint color, blue threading through gray. She paused by her car, looking back at the house. Margaret wasn't afraid, she said. She was tired of carrying something alone. Daniel watched her drive away, dust lifting and falling again. Inside, Hank returned to the hatch, lay down, and closed his eyes. Daniel stood in the quiet kitchen, realizing that whatever Margaret had protected was not finished protecting itself. The knock came just after noon, sharp and impatient, cutting through the quiet that had settled over the house since Eleanor left. Daniel was in the kitchen rinsing his mug when Hank lifted his head at once, ears snapping forward, body already tense. This was not the cautious alertness he'd shown with Eleanor. This was something tighter, more focused. Daniel dried his hands slowly and walked toward the door. Through the narrow glass pane, he saw a young man standing on the porch, shoulders hunched slightly against the chill despite the sun. He was tall, but not in the grounded way Daniel was. This man's height felt unfinished, like a body that had grown faster than the confidence meant to fill it. When Daniel opened the door, the stranger did not introduce himself right away. He stood there, jaw tight, eyes flicking past Daniel into the house, as if measuring what he was about to lose. "Daniel Cole?" he asked. "Yes?" The young man nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "My name's Lucas Hale," he said. I think we need to talk." Lucas was in his early 20s, maybe 22 or 23, with a lean build that bordered on underfed. His dark blonde hair fell into his eyes in an unkempt way, like he'd given up trying to control it. A faint shadow of stubble clung to his jaw, uneven and half-formed, the kind that suggested exhaustion rather than intention. His skin was pale, marked with the faint redness of someone unused to long days outdoors. There was a restlessness in him, a barely contained energy that made it difficult for him to stand still. Before Daniel could respond, Hank stepped forward. The dog placed himself between them, without aggression, but with unmistakable purpose. His posture was low and grounded, head level with Lucas's waist, eyes lifted and intent. Not hostile, evaluating. Lucas stiffened. "Is he going to—" "No," Daniel said calmly. "He won't." Hank took a step closer, sniffed the air around Lucas's hands, his jacket, the hem of his jeans. His tail remained low, unmoving. Then he sat. Lucas exhaled, the tension draining slightly from his shoulders. "He looks like he's deciding whether I'm worth the trouble." Daniel almost smiled. "That's exactly what he's doing." They moved inside. Lucas did not comment on the house at first, but his gaze lingered too long on the photographs, on Margaret's chair by the window, on the narrow hallway that led deeper into the space. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. "She's gone," he said. "I knew that already. I just didn't think I'd be standing here." They sat at opposite sides of the kitchen table. Hank lay down near Lucas's chair, close enough that his presence could not be ignored. Every time Lucas shifted, Hank's eyes followed him, not threatening, but attentive in a way that felt almost protective. "She left me the house," Daniel said carefully. "Along with some debts, apparently." Lucas laughed, a short, humorless sound. "That sounds like her. Always practical, always fair." There was bitterness in the word fair. Lucas leaned forward, forearms on the table. "She gave me up when I was 6, he said abruptly. "Did you know that?" Daniel nodded. "I knew she had a son." "Good," Lucas said. "Because everyone else pretended I didn't exist. Foster homes, group placements, the kind of childhood where you learn early not to unpack your bags." Hank shifted then, inching closer until his flank brushed Lucas's leg. The contact was light, almost accidental, but it made Lucas pause mid-sentence. Daniel watched this carefully. "She visited," Lucas continued, more quietly. "Not often. Always from a distance. She never came inside. She said it was better that way. I hated her for that." His jaw tightened, and Daniel saw something familiar there. A kind of anger sharpened by confusion rather than hatred. "I tracked her down last year," Lucas said. "Not to confront her, just to understand." She was older, smaller somehow, still stubborn. He swallowed. "She didn't apologize. She said she made a choice she could live with, even if I couldn't." Hank lifted his head and rested his chin on Lucas's knee. The contact was deliberate this time. Lucas froze. His breath caught, and his hands clenched slowly into fists. "He didn't do that before," Daniel said quietly. Lucas stared down at the dog. "I'm not dangerous," he said, not defensively, but with a strange urgency. "I'm just tired." Daniel felt the weight of that sentence settle into him. Lucas straightened. "I didn't come here for you," he said. "I came because the bank did. She left debt behind, more than I can cover. And if the house goes, then whatever she was protecting goes with it." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Protecting what?" Lucas shook his head. I don't know. She never told me. But she was scared near the end. Not of dying, of losing something. At that moment, Hank rose suddenly and moved away from the table. He walked toward the hallway, then stopped and turned back, fixing Lucas with a steady look. Daniel followed the dog's gaze. What is it? He asked. Lucas hesitated. She used to look at me like that, he said slowly, like she was measuring the damage before it happened. The rehook settled in the room, heavy and quiet. Not a revelation, but a shared understanding that something had been taken from Lucas long before the house was ever at risk. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Daniel spoke. She took me in when I was 14, he said. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what it cost. Lucas nodded once, eyes fixed on the tabletop. I think I know now. Hank returned to his place near Lucas, lying down again, his presence steady, anchoring. I'm not here to fight you, Lucas said. I'm here because I don't know where else to go. Daniel believed him. Outside, the lake shifted as a breeze passed over its surface, ripples spreading outward in slow, deliberate lines. Inside the house, Daniel began to understand that inheritance was not about what was given, but about what had been taken, and from whom. Thomas Reed arrived without announcement, which was its own kind of message. Daniel was outside stacking firewood near the side of the house when Hank stopped mid-step, his body going rigid in a way Daniel had only seen a handful of times before. The dog's ears flattened slightly, then rose again, every muscle along his back tightening beneath the black and tan coat. His tail went still. Not tucked, not wagging, locked. Daniel followed Hank's line of sight down the gravel drive. A dark sedan rolled in slowly, tires crunching with deliberate restraint. It stopped short of the house, as if its driver knew better than to come any closer without permission. The engine cut. The door opened. The man who stepped out was in his mid-40s, maybe a little older, his age worn unevenly across his face. He was tall, but his posture carried a slight forward lean, the kind that came from years of listening more than speaking. His hair was dark and thinning at the temples, combed back neatly in a way that suggested habit rather than vanity. A short, carefully trimmed beard framed his jaw, more salt than pepper now, giving his face a stern geometry softened only by tired eyes. He wore a plain coat over pressed clothes, nothing that drew attention. Everything about him said intentional restraint. Hank moved forward at once, placing himself squarely in front of Daniel. His hackles lifted, a dark ridge running along his spine. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood, weight balanced, eyes locked on the man. The man noticed. He stopped walking. That's a good dog, he said, voice low and measured. Not condescending, not friendly either. Well trained. Daniel did not respond. I'm Thomas Reed, the man continued. I was hoping we could talk. Hank took another step forward, blocking Daniel more fully now, shoulder brushing Daniel's leg. The dog's breath was steady but audible. I didn't invite you, Daniel said. Reed nodded once. I know. He glanced briefly at the house, then back to Daniel. May I come closer? Daniel considered this. Reed hadn't threatened him, hadn't raised his voice. But there was something unsettling in how easily the man seemed to know the rules of approach. One step, Daniel said. That's it. Reed complied, stopping well short of Hank's invisible boundary. Your mother, Margaret Hale, Reed said. She was a careful woman. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. She didn't talk about you. I wouldn't expect her to, Reed replied. We agreed she wouldn't. Hank's growl rumbled low then, finally breaking the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Reed's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Daniel. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said. "Least of all you." "That makes two of us," Daniel replied. Reed exhaled slowly. "Your father and I served together," he said. "A long time ago." The words landed softly, but their weight was immediate. Daniel did not move. He did not speak. "Your father kept things," Reed continued. "Not official records, personal ones, journals, recordings, thoughts he never meant for anyone else to hear." Hank shifted, stepping even closer, his body now fully shielding Daniel. His ears were back, eyes unblinking. "They weren't classified," Reed said quickly, as if anticipating an objection. "They weren't evidence in any legal sense, but they were dangerous. Because truth can be when it's taken out of context." Daniel's voice was flat. "You're saying my father wrote things people wouldn't want read?" Reed's mouth tightened. "I'm saying he wrote things people wouldn't survive having read aloud." A silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. "Margaret knew," Reed said. "She didn't read everything. She didn't need to. She understood what carrying those words meant." Daniel felt something crack, not break, but strain inside him. "So she hid me," he said. "Because of him." "She kept you away," Reed corrected gently. "From questions. From men like me." Hank suddenly stepped forward again, forcing Reed to stop himself from instinctively retreating. The dog's teeth showed now, not bared, but visible. A warning. Daniel placed a hand on Hank's shoulder, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fur. "Easy," he murmured. Hank did not relax, but he stayed. Reed studied the dog with a careful, assessing look. "He recognizes me," he said. Daniel's hand stilled. "From where?" Reed hesitated, just long enough to matter. "I've been here before," he said. "Years ago, briefly." That was the rehook. The moment the ground shifted, just slightly, under Daniel's feet. Not a revelation, but a fracture in the story he thought he understood. "You came here," Daniel said, "while she was alive." Reed nodded. "Once. She told me to leave and never come back. I listened." Hank's growl deepened, vibrating against Daniel's palm. "She wasn't afraid of you?" Daniel said. "No," Reed agreed. "She was afraid of what forgetting would cost." They stood there for a long moment, the lake wind stirring the trees behind them. Reed's voice softened when he spoke again. "I'm sick," he said. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon enough. And I don't want my children, or yours, to inherit the wreckage of things that should have been allowed to end." Daniel looked at him sharply. "You want me to destroy whatever's left?" Reed shook his head. "I want you to leave it where it is, undisturbed. Some memories only become poison when they are exposed to air." Hank let out a sharp breath through his nose, a sound somewhere between a snort and a warning. He did not agree. Daniel felt the weight of the choice being placed in his hands, unwanted and heavy. "And if I don't?" Reed met his gaze. "Then men who are far less patient than I am will come asking, and they won't bring explanations." The threat was not in his tone, but in his certainty. Daniel straightened, every line of his body aligning with resolve. "You don't get to decide what I carry." Reed studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Your father said the same thing." He took a step back, then another. "I hope," Reed said quietly, "that you'll choose mercy over truth. They don't always travel well together." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. Hank watched him leave, body still tense, until the sedan disappeared down the drive. Only then did the dog relax, lowering his head, though he did not move from Daniel's side. Daniel stood where he was, the afternoon light shifting around him, understanding now that the silence Margaret had kept was not emptiness, but armor. And armor, once removed, could cut just as deeply as it protected. The rain began after dusk, thin at first, then steady, tapping against the lake with a persistence that made sleep feel like an unreasonable request. Daniel sat at the small desk Margaret had once used for bills and letters, the lamp casting a low circle of light across the wood. Outside, the water darkened into a single, unbroken surface. Inside, Hank paced. The German Shepherd moved with purpose rather than restlessness, crossing the room and returning to the door, then stopping near the window as if checking angles only he could see. His coat, black along the spine and shoulders, caught the lamplight in muted highlights. When he paused, his ears angled forward, then flattened briefly, responding to sounds Daniel could not hear. This was not fear. It was recognition. "You're doing it again," Daniel said quietly. Hank stopped. He looked at Daniel, amber eyes steady, then turned and fixed his gaze on the lake beyond the trees. He held it there, unblinking. Daniel felt the pressure return, the sense that something had been called up rather than discovered. He pulled on his jacket and reached for the leash, but Hank was already at the door, waiting, posture calm, tail low. They did not go far at first. The path toward the water was familiar, worn by years of Margaret's careful steps. The air smelled of wet pine and iron-rich soil. Hank moved ahead, nose low, tracking a line that did not exist on the ground so much as in memory. He stopped near the old dock posts, rotted stumps now, barely visible above the mud, and lifted his head, drawing in the air slowly. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered without looking at the screen. "Daniel," a man's voice said, calm, precise. "It's Alan Whitmore." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "You found me fast." "I had a reason to," Whitmore replied. "You still have him with you?" Daniel glanced at Hank, who had sat now, facing the lake, body aligned as if awaiting instruction. "Yes." "Good," Whitmore said. "Because you're standing near the wrong place." Daniel's spine straightened. "You know where I am." "I know where he is," Whitmore corrected. Listen carefully. Hank was trained to respond to specific compounds. Military-grade alloys leave a signature, subtle but persistent. Water preserves it longer than soil. Daniel looked at the lake again. The surface reflected nothing. "You're saying he's reacting to metal." "I'm saying he's reacting to duty," Whitmore replied. "Those aren't the same thing." Dr. Alan Whitmore had been Daniel's first call after Reed left. In his mid-50s, Whitmore carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades correcting assumptions rather than raising his voice. He was lean, gray-haired, and perpetually composed, with a face shaped by patience and eyes that missed very little. He had trained dogs for military service long before Daniel had learned to trust one with his life. Hank was assigned a static protection task late in his service. Whitmore continued. "No handler rotation, no active patrol. Just guard and hold. That kind of training doesn't end cleanly." Daniel swallowed. What was he guarding? Whitmore paused. "That part was above my clearance, but I knew it wasn't meant to move." The rehook came without drama, settling into Daniel's chest like a weight. Hank was not leading him somewhere new. He was returning to a post he had never abandoned. The rain thickened. Daniel ended the call and crouched beside Hank, fingers pressing into the thick fur at the dog's neck. "Show me," he said. Hank stood. They moved together into the shallows, Daniel's boots sinking into mud, water seeping in at the seams. The lake was colder than he expected, a sharp shock that bit through the leather. Hank waded forward without hesitation, chest deep now, then deeper, until his paws left the ground and he began to swim, strong strokes cutting through the dark water. Daniel followed, breath controlled, muscles working from memory rather than comfort. He dove once, surfaced, then dove again, eyes adjusting to the murk below. On the third attempt, his hand struck something solid. The object was heavier than he expected, rectangular, anchored. Daniel surfaced, gasping, and took a moment to orient himself. Hank circled once, then stopped, treading water beside him, eyes fixed on the spot. It took effort. Rope from the shed, leverage from a submerged log, patience he did not know he had, but eventually the object broke free. A metal case, sealed, edges worn but intact, rose from the lake with a reluctance that felt almost personal. They hauled it onto the bank together. Hank shook himself once, sending water arcing through the air, then sat beside the case, posture erect, gaze forward. Guarding. Daniel knelt and brushed mud from the latch. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the sudden clarity of what he was touching. This was not an accident. This was not improvisation. He opened the case. Inside were items wrapped with care. A small recorder, sealed in plastic. A stack of notebooks, edges softened by water but readable. A military insignia, dulled by time. Nothing explosive, nothing classified, nothing that could topple a government. Everything that could ruin a life. Daniel sat back on his heels, rain soaking into his clothes, and listened to the lake breathe. He did not play the recording. Not yet. He did not open the notebooks. Not yet. He knew, in the way soldiers know when to wait, that understanding required context. Hank shifted closer, pressing his shoulder against Daniel's leg. The contact was firm, grounding. He was not asking. He was confirming. Back inside the house, Daniel laid the contents out on the table, each item placed with deliberate care. Hank lay beneath the window, eyes half-lidded but alert, body angled toward the door. Daniel called Whitmore again. "It's real," Daniel said. "I know," Whitmore replied. "Why give a dog a task like that?" Whitmore's voice softened. "Because dogs remember what people choose to forget, and because someone needed to stay." Daniel looked at Hank. The dog's chest rose and fell steadily, breath even, controlled. He had waited. He had held. He had not failed. "Was he told when it would end?" Daniel asked. "No," Whitmore said. "Those kinds of assignments don't come with end dates." Daniel ended the call and sat alone with the truth, heavy and unspoken. He understood now why Margaret had kept the house, why she had refused to move, why she had watched the lake with a look Daniel had once mistaken for boredom. She had been keeping watch. Hank rose and moved to the table, placing his front paws on the edge, nose hovering inches from the recorder. He did not touch it. He did not whine. He simply waited. Daniel placed a hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth beneath the wet fur. "You kept your promise," he said. Hank's ears flicked. His tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the lake smooth again, as if nothing had been disturbed. Inside, Daniel understood something he had never been taught. Some vows did not end with service. Some duties did not belong to the ground. The house felt smaller once the case had been brought inside. Not cramped, but weighted, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Daniel moved through the rooms with a careful economy of motion, placing the metal case beneath the stairs, behind the false panel Margaret had reinforced years ago. He worked without hurry. Hurry was how mistakes were made. Hank watched from the kitchen doorway, his body angled toward the front of the house, ears pivoting with every distant sound, the discipline of his posture unchanged despite the damp fur along his shoulders. Lucas hovered near the table, restless hands shoving into his jacket pockets and out again, the way he did when words pressed too hard against his teeth. In the daylight, he looked younger than Daniel had first thought. The angles of his face sharp but unfinished, a bruise yellow fading along one knuckle, that suggested recent trouble and the kind of life that didn't ask permission before colliding with you. He had not slept much. None of them had. "You can't keep this place," Lucas said, not looking at Daniel. "You know that, right?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He checked the latch once more, pressed the panel closed, and stood. "I know what the numbers say." Lucas scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "Then you know the bank doesn't care about history, or vows, or what she meant to you. They'll take the house, sell the land, and whatever you're hiding with it." Hank shifted at the word hiding, nails clicking softly against the floor, then settled again, eyes steady. "I'm not hiding it," Daniel said. "I'm deciding what it's for." Lucas finally met his gaze. "And what about me? She left me debt and a goodbye that never came. You want me to carry that so you can protect a memory?" Daniel felt the truth of that land, where truths usually hurt the most. "I want you to have a choice." Lucas laughed, sharp and humorless. "That's rich. You got the choice. I got the consequences." The knock came before Daniel could answer. Hank rose instantly, body stiffening, a low sound building in his chest like thunder held back. Daniel moved toward the door, palm raised slightly, the silent signal Hank knew well. "Stay, but be ready." When Daniel opened the door, Thomas Reed stood on the porch again, raincoat draped neatly over one arm despite the clear sky, as if he preferred to be prepared for weather that hadn't arrived yet. In daylight, his face showed more lines than it had the day before, the tired geometry of a man who had learned to carry regret without letting it change his pace. His eyes flicked past Daniel into the house, measuring space and distance, then returned to Daniel's face. "I hoped we could avoid this," Reed said. "So did I," Daniel replied. Reed stepped inside with an ease that made Lucas stiffen. "You brought it up," Reed said, "from the lake." Hank moved between them, hackles rising, the ridge along his spine dark and unmistakable. He did not bark. He did not retreat. Reed stopped. "I told you what would happen." "You told me what you wanted," Daniel said, "not what was right." Reed's mouth tightened. Right is a luxury when people get hurt. Eleanor Pike entered from the hallway, having arrived quietly through the side door. She looked smaller than usual today, her jacket too thin for the chill, dark hair pulled back with less care than before. Her eyes were bright, intent, the look of someone who had decided to witness something rather than shape it. "Thomas," she said, "if you're here to force a hand, you're too late." Reed glanced at her. "You don't understand the scope." "I understand the cost," Eleanor replied. "And I understand restraint." Lucas stepped forward, anger cutting through his fatigue. "You two want to argue ethics over a house that's about to be taken from both of us?" Reed's gaze slid to Lucas, appraising. "You must be the son." Lucas flinched, just slightly. "I'm not here to erase anyone," Reed said. "I'm here to make sure what never belonged to the public doesn't become spectacle." Hank lunged. It happened fast. Reed shifted instinctively, stepping back as Hank surged forward, not toward Reed's throat, but toward the space between Reed and the stairs. There was a sharp sound, metal scraping wood, as Reed's heel caught the edge of the panel beneath the stairs. The panel popped, just enough. Hank corrected his path mid-stride, shoulder slamming into Reed's shin. Reed fell hard. Hank yelped. Daniel was there instantly, hand on the dog's neck, eyes scanning. Blood seeped through Hank's fur along the foreleg, dark and sudden against tan hair. The injury was not catastrophic, but it was real, and the sight of it punched something raw through Daniel's chest. "That's enough," Eleanor said sharply. Reed pushed himself upright, breathing hard, shock and regret warring on his face. "I didn't mean—" "You meant to cross a line," Daniel said, voice steady and cold. "And he stopped you." Daniel wrapped Hank's leg with a clean towel. Pressure firm. Practiced. Hank stood still, accepting the pain with the discipline of a creature who understood duty. His eyes never left the stairs. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that arrives after choices make themselves known. The rehook settled there, heavy and undeniable. No matter what Daniel chose next, someone had already paid for it. Eleanor broke the silence. "Daniel," she said softly, "if this becomes public in full, families who had nothing to do with the worst of it will still burn. Silence protects the guilty, but it also shields the innocent." Lucas swallowed. "And if you destroy it," he said, "then she died for nothing." Daniel looked at Hank, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, at the way he leaned subtly toward the stairs even while injured. Loyalty did not ask for permission. It endured. "I won't hand it over," Daniel said to Reed, "and I won't erase it." Reed closed his eyes briefly. "Then you'll make enemies." "I already have them," Daniel replied. "I'm choosing which ones I can live with." He turned to Eleanor. "You can write," he said, "but not everything. You write the pattern, not the names. You expose the pressure, not the private bones." Eleanor nodded, relief and gravity braided together in her expression. "I can do that." Daniel faced Lucas. "The house won't be sold," he said. "Not now. I'll cover the debt. And when this is over, you decide what you do with what's left. With me or without me." Lucas stared at him, searching for the trick. Finding none, he looked away, jaw tight. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I'm not asking you to," Daniel said. "I'm asking you to stay." Reed stood slowly, dignity reclaimed with effort. "This won't end cleanly," he said. "It never does," Daniel replied. "But it ends." Reed left without another word. Daniel lifted Hank carefully and carried him to the kitchen table, where the light was better. Hank's tail thumped once, faintly, as if to say the task was not finished, only paused. Daniel cleaned the wound, wrapped it properly, and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. "You did good," he murmured. Hank's ears flicked. He stayed. No one left that room without losing something. But Daniel understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that what remained was still worth protecting. Autumn arrived quietly, without announcement, the way some endings did. The trees around the lake turned first at the edges, green softening into gold, then into rust, as if the land itself were learning how to let go without spectacle. The house stood unchanged, but it breathed differently now. Windows stayed open longer. Light moved through rooms that had once held their breath. Reed did not return. There was no final confrontation, no apology left on the porch, no official closure. He simply withdrew, calls unanswered, messages unreturned, his presence dissolving into the kind of absence that did not demand to be explained. It was not a victory. It was not defeat. It was a retreat shaped by understanding rather than fear. Daniel accepted it without ceremony. Lucas stayed. At first, it was practical. Boxes left half unpacked in the guest room. Tools borrowed, then returned. Meals eaten at opposite ends of the table, conversation limited to what needed to be said. Lucas moved like someone testing the weight of a place, unsure whether it would collapse under him. He was still lean, still restless, but the edge in him had dulled. His shoulders relaxed a fraction at a time, as if the house were teaching him how to stand without bracing for impact. One evening, as they sat on the back steps, watching the lake darken into blue, Lucas spoke without looking up. "She used to stand there," he said, nodding toward the water. "Every night, same spot." Daniel followed his gaze. "She was keeping watch." Lucas nodded. Silence stretched between them, no longer sharp. After that, the word came easier. "Good night," Lucas said one night. pausing at the bottom of the stairs. "Thanks, brother." It was quiet, unforced, a statement rather than a question. Daniel felt it settle into place, not as absolution, not as replacement, but as recognition. "Sleep well," he replied. Eleanor's article ran a week later. It did not name names. It did not publish transcripts or play recordings. Instead, it traced a pattern: how institutions learned to survive by letting individuals carry the weight of what could not be processed publicly. It spoke about silence as a tool, not a failure, about how truth, when mishandled, could injure the wrong people. It described a house by a lake, unnamed, where the past had been held with care until someone arrived who knew how to set it down. Readers responded in letters, not comments. Old men wrote about files they had never opened. Women wrote about stories they had chosen not to tell their children yet. Eleanor read them all, hands steady, eyes tired, knowing she had done exactly what she had promised, written what mattered without turning memory into spectacle. The first dog arrived in early November. She was a Belgian Malinois named Ash, 7 years old, gray-muzzled and wary. Her coat faded in places where harnesses had rubbed too long. She walked with a careful precision, each step measured, eyes flicking constantly to doors and corners. Daniel knelt to meet her at eye level, his movements slow, respectful. Hank watched from the porch, head tilted, assessing. Ash hesitated, then approached, tail low but wagging once, tentative. Hank did not move to dominate or retreat. He stood, weight evenly balanced, and lowered his head in greeting. It was not command, it was invitation. The house learned new rhythms after that. More dogs followed, some young, some old, some carrying injuries you could see, others carrying ones you could not. Daniel adapted the space with quiet efficiency, reinforcing floors, clearing rooms, opening the house outward rather than sealing it shut. Lucas helped without being asked, his hands quick and capable, his presence grounding. Hank healed. The wound on his leg closed cleanly, though it stiffened in the cold. He moved more slowly now, favoring the injured side when he thought no one was watching. His muzzle had gone silver almost overnight, his eyes softer but no less aware. He slept longer, deeper, stretched out in the sun when it found the porch in the afternoons. Sometimes he would rise and walk to the edge of the yard, stopping at the exact place where the lake came into view. He would stand there, still and steady, until the light shifted. Then he would turn back, satisfied. Daniel watched him one morning, coffee cooling in his hands, and understood something Margaret had never said aloud. Hank had not been guarding the past. He had been guarding the moment when someone would be ready. Lucas joined Daniel on the porch, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill. "You're not selling," he said, not as a question. "No," Daniel replied. Lucas nodded. "Good." They stood together, watching Ash and another dog move carefully along the path, guided by a volunteer whose voice stayed calm and low. The lake reflected the sky now, clean and unbroken, no longer holding anything that did not belong to it. That evening, Daniel sat at the small desk beneath the stairs, the notebooks laid out before him. He did not open them all. He did not need to. Some things were meant to remain private, not because they were shameful, but because they were complete. He wrapped them carefully, returned them to the case, and sealed it. Not to hide it, but to mark it as finished. Then he placed the case in the place Margaret had chosen, where it could rest without being forgotten. Hank came to him then, moving with effort but determination. He leaned his weight against Daniel's leg, a familiar pressure, grounding and warm. "You're done," Daniel said softly. Hank's ears flicked. His tail thumped once. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, lifting leaves and letting them fall again, each one finding its own place. Daniel understood, finally, that legacy was not a story you told in full. It was a balance you learned to keep, between memory and mercy, between truth and care. Some things did not need to be uncovered to exist. They only needed to be placed where they could breathe. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not the ones that arrive with thunder or light, but the ones that come quietly and wait for us to be ready. In this story, no angel appeared in the sky, and no voice spoke from the clouds. Yet guidance was present all the same, in loyalty that did not waver, in truth that refused to disappear, and in a path that opened only when someone chose compassion over fear. If God works in the world, perhaps he often does so through patience, through conscience, and through the small, steady love that endures when louder forces fail. In our own lives, many of us carry things we do not speak about, memories, regrets, unanswered questions. We hide them, not because they are evil, but because we are afraid of what might happen if they are seen. This story reminds us that some burdens are not meant to be buried forever, only held with care until the right moment comes to place them down. If this story touched your heart, consider how quiet grace may already be working in your own life. Pay attention to the small signs, the loyal presences, the moments when something gently stops you and asks you to choose kindness instead of silence. Please share this story with someone who might need comfort or reflection today. Leave a comment to tell us what part spoke to you most, or where you are watching from. And if you would like to continue walking these quiet paths with us, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories. May God watch over you, protect your heart, and grant you peace in both the things you remember and the things you are still learning to release.